Arthur Thorne's world was made of glass and steel and silence. From his penthouse office, London was a circuit board beneath him, a network of lights and patterns he knew how to control. The city moved to his rhythm. It had for 20 years. He sat in a chair that was worth more than the cars most people drove. The desk before him was a single, flawless slab of obsidian, polished to a mirror finish. Nothing was on it. Not a paper, not a pen. Order. Control. These were the pillars of his empire. An empire built on whispers and shadows, on favors owed and threats understood. He was not a king, for kings were loud. He was gravity. An unseen force that kept everything in its orbit. Tonight, the silence was deeper than usual. He had returned from Lisbon 2 weeks ago. The trip was a formality, a quiet meeting to absorb a competitor's shipping routes. It was bloodless. Efficient. He had forgotten about it the moment his jet left the tarmac. He stood, walking over to the wardrobe built into the wall. It was time to shed the day. The suit he wore was bespoke, armor woven from the finest wool. He unbuttoned the jacket, the familiar weight leaving his shoulders. He reached into the inner pocket, a reflex honed over decades of checking for things that should not be there. His fingers brushed against something soft. Not the crisp edge of a business card. Not the slick surface of a phone. Paper. Flimsy and delicate. He pulled it out. It was a cocktail napkin. Thin, cheap, and slightly crumpled. He did not frequent places that used such things. His memory, a ruthlessly organized archive, began to search. Lisbon. A small cafe near the docks. He had been waiting for a contact. The place smelled of roasted coffee and salt from the sea. It was loud. Full of life. He had hated it. He had ordered an espresso. It had been placed before him by a hand that was not perfectly manicured. A working hand. The waitress. He remembered her eyes. Not their color, but the exhaustion in them. An old, weary sadness that seemed out of place in her young face. She had smiled, but it was a ghost of a smile, a thing learned by rote. He had left a tip far larger than necessary and had not looked back. Now, he unfolded the napkin under the cold, architectural light of his office. There was writing on it. A hurried, looping script in blue ink. A phone number. And beneath it, a short sentence. In case you ever need to remember what sunshine feels like. Arthur Thorne went very still. The city outside, his city, faded away. The silence in the room was no longer his own. It was filled with the ghost of a clattering cafe, the scent of coffee, and the memory of a sad, fleeting smile. Sunshine. A word he had not thought about in a very, very long time. He held the napkin as if it were a detonator. In his world of concrete contracts and ironclad deals, this piece of paper was an anomaly. It was a variable he could not account for. His hand, a hand that had signed orders that shifted fortunes and ended careers, trembled. Just for a second. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next is a testament to the fact that even the smallest act of kindness can echo across oceans, and a man who deals in darkness can be moved to fly 4,000 miles for a single ray of light. We think you'll love this story. So, do us a favor and like this video, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss out. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love to see how far our stories travel. Now, let's get started. Arthur Thorne was a man forged in the crucible of his father's legacy. The old man, Alastair Thorne, had been a brute. A classic gangster of the London underworld. He ran his business with a sledgehammer, all loud threats and public displays of force. He was feared, but not respected. When Arthur took over at the age of 25, he changed the rules. He traded the sledgehammer for a scalpel. He moved the business out of the back alleys and into the boardrooms. He laundered the family's reputation just as meticulously as he laundered its money. He became a legitimate businessman. On paper. Beneath the surface, the old machinery still turned. But it was quieter now. More precise. Arthur's power was not in the violence he committed, but in the violence he could command with a single, quiet phone call. His organization was a ghost in the system, its influence felt everywhere but seen nowhere. He had one code. A rule his father had always sneered at. No innocence. Civilians, as he called them, were off limits. The women, the children, the ordinary people just trying to get by, they were not part of the game. To harm them was not just wrong, it was unprofessional. It was messy. It created problems that money and power could not always solve. This code was born from a memory. A memory of a woman named Annalise. She was not from his world. She was a university librarian, a woman who smelled of old books and chamomile tea. They had met by chance, a collision in a rainstorm. For 2 years, she had been his secret. His sanctuary. She was his sunshine. She used to say that to him. You live in the shadows, Arthur. Let me be your sunshine. But shadows have a way of swallowing the light. One of his father's old rivals, seeking to wound Arthur, had targeted her. She was not harmed, not physically. But she was shown Arthur's world. The unvarnished, brutal truth of it. She had looked at him one last time, her eyes filled not with fear but with a deep, bottomless sorrow. And then she was gone. He never saw her again. He had dealt with the rival. Permanently. And from that day forward, the wall around his heart had grown thicker. The code became absolute. The game would be played, but the audience would be protected. At all costs. Now, decades later, another woman had used that word. Sunshine. He stood in his silent office, the napkin a fragile relic in his hand. He walked to the window, looking down at the unblinking lights of the city. He was the master of all he surveyed. A man who had everything and felt nothing. Until now. He pulled out his phone. It was a custom device, encrypted and untraceable. He did not dial the number on the napkin. Not yet. He dialed another number. One known only to a handful of people. Julian answered on the first ring. Arthur. Julian was his lieutenant, his right hand. A man who had been with him since the beginning, who understood the business better than anyone. He was loyal, efficient, and utterly devoid of sentiment. I need information, Arthur said, his voice low. Of course. What's the target? Arthur paused. The question felt wrong. Not a target. A person. He described the cafe in Lisbon. He gave Julian the date and approximate time of his visit. There was a waitress. Young. Dark hair. Find her. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. Julian was processing the unusual request. They tracked rivals, politicians, financial assets. They did not track waitresses. Is she a threat? Julian finally asked. No, Arthur said, the word feeling inadequate. She's an interest. Understood. I'll have something for you by morning. Arthur ended the call. He placed the napkin on the obsidian desk. It looked small and out of place, a wildflower growing through concrete. He did not sleep that night. He sat in his chair, watching the dawn creep over the city, the napkin the only thing in his line of sight. He was a man who planned for every contingency, who saw the world as a chessboard. But this was not a chess piece. It was a question. By 9 in the morning, a file appeared on his encrypted server. It was concise, as all of Julian's reports were. Her name was Ilara. Age 24. An orphan raised in the foster system in a rural town outside Lisbon. She had come to the city with dreams of opening a small bakery. The report was filled with the mundane details of a difficult life. Long hours. Low pay. A tiny apartment shared with 2 other women. Then came the part that made Arthur's knuckles turn white. Her ex-boyfriend. Marco. He was not a major player. a small-time criminal who ran a minor protection racket, preying on local shop owners. He was arrogant, violent, and possessive. According to the report, he saw Ilara as his property. She had left him 6 months ago, but he had refused to let go. He had manufactured a debt, claiming she owed him money from their time together. The amount was not large by Arthur's standards, but to Ilara, it was a mountain. Marco used the debt as a leash. He would show up at her work, at her apartment. He would take most of her wages, leaving her just enough to survive. The local police were useless, either paid off or too intimidated to intervene. Julian's field operative had included a brief, personal observation. Subject displays classic signs of long-term stress and fear. She is well liked by her regular customers and colleagues, who describe her as kind and resilient. However, she appears withdrawn and constantly vigilant. Marco was observed harassing her outside the cafe 2 nights ago. He was physically intimidating, backing her against a wall. She gave him all the money in her wallet. She did not cry until after he was gone. The report ended there. Arthur closed the file. He stared at the black screen of his monitor. He thought of the exhaustion in her eyes. It was not just from long hours. It was the exhaustion of being hunted. Of having no escape. He thought of Annalise. He thought of the rival who had used her to get to him. The same casual cruelty. The same belief that people were objects to be used and discarded. Marco was not a rival. He was a maggot. A parasite feeding on someone who had nothing. And he was breaking Arthur's one, inviolable rule. He was harming an innocent. He was stealing her sunshine. The decision was not a storm. It was a quiet shift in the Earth's tectonic plates. A deep, fundamental realignment. The world of business, of profits and losses, of strategy and territory, fell away. All the complex machinery of his life simplified into a single, stark equation. There was a monster. And there was a woman who needed help. His logical mind, the cold calculator that had built his empire, screamed at him. This was not his concern. It was a personal matter 4,000 miles away. It was a distraction. A liability. Getting involved was a breach of his own protocol. He operated from the shadows, detached and clinical. This was personal. This was messy. He remembered the feeling of Annalise's hand in his. He remembered the way she would look at him, as if she could see the man he might have been, the man he was before the world had hardened him into this shape. He had failed to protect her. He had let the darkness of his world touch her, and it had extinguished her light. He had lived with that failure for 25 years. It was the bedrock of his solitude, the ghost in his machine. He looked at the napkin on his desk. In case you ever need to remember what sunshine feels like. It was not a plea for help. It was a gift. A small, selfless act of kindness from a woman who had every reason to be bitter, to be closed off from the world. In the middle of her own private storm, she had tried to offer a stranger a moment of warmth. She had offered it to him. Was it a coincidence? A random alignment of stars? Or was it the universe offering him a chance he never thought he would get again? A chance to stand between the darkness and the light. A chance for redemption. He could send money. An anonymous transfer that would solve her financial problem. He could make a phone call, have some local asset in Lisbon deal with Marco quietly. That would be the smart move. The professional move. But it would not be enough. This was not a business transaction. It was a debt. And Arthur Thorne always paid his debts in person. He wanted to see the man who dared to do this. He wanted to look him in the eye. He wanted Marco to understand, in his final moments, that his mistake was not in choosing a weak victim, but in choosing a victim who had, by a twist of fate, offered a moment of grace to a man like Arthur. He picked up his phone and dialed Julian. Arthur. Ready the jet. There was another pause. Longer this time. Julian was the voice of reason, the man who kept Arthur grounded. To where? Julian asked carefully. Lisbon. The Waitress. Julian's voice was laced with disbelief. Arthur, this is not our way. It's sentimental. It's a risk for no profit. The profit is not on the balance sheet, Julian, Arthur said, his voice quiet but absolute. This one is personal. What is the objective? Arthur looked at the napkin. We're going to solve a problem. Permanently. And we are going to deliver a payment. A payment? Yes, Arthur said. For the sunshine. He did not need to say more. Julian understood. The tone in Arthur's voice was one he had not heard in many years, not since the days after Annalise had disappeared. It was the sound of iron being forged. I'll gather a team, Julian said, his voice now back to its usual efficiency. 2 men. The best. We can be airborne in an hour. Good, Arthur said. He was about to hang up, but he paused. He pulled up the number from the napkin. He pressed the call button. He did not intend to speak. He just needed to know it was real. That she was real. It rang 3 times, and then a hesitant voice answered. Ola? Her voice was softer than he had imagined. Tired, but with an undercurrent of warmth. Arthur said nothing. He just listened. He could hear the clatter of dishes in the background. The murmur of conversation. The sounds of her world. Hello, she said again, this time in English, a question in her voice. Is anyone there? He closed his eyes. He could picture her standing in the back of the cafe, holding the phone, a worried line on her brow. He gently ended the call. He had his confirmation. He stood up, walked to the wardrobe, and selected a simple, dark suit. It was time to go to work. The flight to Lisbon was silent. Arthur sat in his leather seat, the cabin of the Gulf Stream a sterile cocoon of luxury. He did not read. He did not work. He simply stared out the window at the endless expanse of blue sky. Julian sat opposite him, reviewing files on a tablet. With him were 2 men, Liam and Finn. They were Irish twins, though not by blood. Both were former special forces, recruited by Arthur for their skills and their quiet professionalism. They were his scalpels. They did not speak. They did not need to. The plan was already understood. Upon landing at a private airfield outside Lisbon, a black sedan was waiting. No logos. No markings. It was anonymous, just like the men who stepped inside it. Marco's routine is predictable, Julian said as they drove into the city. He collects from the local shops in the afternoon. Spends the evenings at one of 2 bars in the Alfama district. He lives in a small apartment above a closed butcher shop. Anilara? Arthur asked, his first word since they had boarded the plane. She finishes her shift at 10. She takes the tram home. She rarely goes out, Julian reported. She is, for all intents and purposes, a prisoner of her routine. Arthur nodded. We will observe tonight. We move tomorrow. They did not go to a 5-star hotel. They went to a discreet, high-end apartment Julian had secured. It overlooked the warren of streets where Marco operated. From the balcony, Arthur could see the city sprawling towards the Tagus River. It was beautiful. A city of hills and history, bathed in a golden light he had not noticed on his last trip. He felt like a foreigner in his own life. That evening, they watched. Liam and Finn were ghosts. They moved through the Alfama district, melting into the crowds of tourists and locals. They were unseen, unheard. Their reports came back to Julian's tablet in short, coded messages. Target is at the Gilded Cage. Drinking. Bragging. He is with 2 associates. Low-level muscle. He just received a call. He seems agitated. Arthur stood on the balcony, a pair of powerful binoculars in his hand. He was not looking at the Gilded Cage. He was looking at a tram stop 3 streets away. At 10:17 p.m., he saw her. Ilara. She stepped off the tram, pulling a thin cardigan around her shoulders. She looked smaller than he remembered. More fragile. She kept her head down, her steps quick and purposeful. She clutched her bag to her chest like a shield. She was just a girl, trying to get home. As she turned a corner, a figure stepped out of a darkened doorway. Marco. Even from this distance, Arthur could see the arrogance in his posture. The way he blocked her path. Arthur's grip on the binoculars tightened. His knuckles were white. The conversation was short. Marco gestured angrily. Ilara flinched. She reached into her bag and handed him something. Money. Her earnings for the day. Marco counted it, then sneered. He said something, leaning close to her face. She recoiled. Then he laughed, patted her on the cheek in a gesture of mocking ownership, and walked away. Ilara stood there for a long moment, her shoulders shaking. She leaned against the wall, her face in her hands. She did not make a sound, but Arthur could feel her silent sobs across the distance, a vibration in the air. He lowered the binoculars. The quiet, calculated rage that had been simmering inside him now. They are not a problem, Arthur said. He humiliated her. He did it in the street like she was nothing. This ends tonight. Julian looked at Arthur's face, bathed in the city lights. He saw something he had not seen before. Not just cold anger, but a profound, personal pain. He simply nodded. Liam and Finn are in position. What are your orders? The plan was swift and brutal in its simplicity. Phase 1 was isolation. Liam and Finn separated from each other. Liam followed Marco's 2 associates when they left the bar an hour later, drunk and stumbling. They would not make it back to their homes. Their departure from Marco's life would be quiet and final, 2 minor footnotes in a story. Finn remained near the gilded cage, a shadow among shadows, confirming that Marco was now alone, settling his bill. Phase 2 was the confrontation. Arthur and Julian left the apartment. They drove the black sedan to the street where Marco lived. They parked in the darkness of the closed butcher shop below his apartment. They waited. At 1:30 a.m., Marco appeared, walking with the unsteady gait of a man full of cheap wine and self-importance. He fumbled with his keys at the door to the stairwell next to the shop. As the door clicked open, Julian stepped out of the car. Marco, he said, his voice polite. Marco turned, startled. Who are you? A business associate of a friend, Julian said smoothly. We need a word. Marco sneered. I don't have any friends with men in suits. Get lost. He turned to go up the stairs. Julian moved with a speed that belied his calm demeanor. He closed the distance in a single step, his hand grabbing the back of Marco's neck. It was not a violent motion. It was an act of absolute control, like a biologist handling a venomous snake. Marco grunted, his bravado vanishing instantly. Hey! What is this? A conversation, Julian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He propelled Marco not up the stairs, but towards the back of the building, into the narrow, foul-smelling alley behind the butcher shop. Arthur got out of the car and followed. He moved with a deliberate, unhurried pace. The sound of his leather shoes on the cobblestones was the only sound in the alley. Julian pushed Marco against a brick wall, holding him there effortlessly. Marco struggled, but it was like wrestling with a statue. Arthur stopped a few feet away. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Do you know who I am? Arthur asked. Marco squinted in the dim light. I don't know you. This is a mistake. You want money? Is that it? No, Arthur said. This is not about money. He stepped closer. The faint light from a distant street lamp caught the side of his face. There was no anger in his expression. There was nothing. It was the blank, placid face of a man about to perform a necessary but unpleasant task, like taking out the trash. This is about Ilara, Arthur said. Marco's eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed in defiance. The waitress? What about her? She's my business. Stay out of it. She is not your business, Arthur corrected him gently. She is a person. And you have been treating her like an object. You have been stealing from her. You have been frightening her. You have broken a very important rule. Marco laughed, a strained, nervous sound. What rule? Your rule? Who the hell are you to make rules in my city? I am the man who enforces them, Arthur said simply. You see, in my world, we have an understanding. We do not harm civilians. We do not prey on the weak, on those outside the game. It is a sign of poor character. It is dishonorable. He savored the word. Dishonorable. It was the worst insult in his vocabulary. She gave me a gift, Arthur continued, his voice still quiet, almost conversational. A small thing. A kindness she did not have to offer. And in return, you offered her cruelty. This has created an imbalance. An imbalance I am here to correct. Marco's bravado finally cracked. Fear, pure and primal, flooded his eyes. He was beginning to understand that this was not a shakedown. This was not about territory. This was something else entirely. Something he could not comprehend. Look, man, I'll leave her alone, he stammered, his voice suddenly high-pitched. I swear. I'll give her the money back. All of it. Just let me go. Arthur looked at him, a flicker of something almost like pity in his eyes. It is too late for that, he said. You see, the problem with men like you is that you only understand one language. You do not understand kindness. You do not understand mercy. You only understand finality. He gave a slight nod to Julian. Julian released his grip on Marco's neck. Marco slumped against the wall, gasping for air, his eyes darting between the two men, looking for an escape that was not there. This is not for me, Arthur said, his final words to the man. This is for the sunshine. He turned and walked back towards the car, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the alley. He did not look back. He did not need to. The matter of Marco was permanently closed. He would not be bothering Ilara, or anyone else, ever again. The next morning, Arthur woke to the sun streaming through the apartment window. He felt lighter. The cold, hard knot that had been sitting in his chest for decades felt looser. He put on a simple linen shirt and trousers. He was no longer the predator of the night before. He was just a man. A tourist. Liam and Finn have cleaned up, Julian reported, handing him a cup of black coffee. There are no loose ends. Marco's associates have vanished. The police will find nothing. It will be as if he was simply erased. Good, Arthur said. What is our next move? Julian asked. Back to London. Not yet, Arthur said. I have a debt to pay. He walked to the cafe. It was just as he remembered. Loud, bright, full of the aroma of coffee and pastries. He took the same small table in the corner. A few minutes later, she approached. Good morning, she said, her voice still holding that familiar weariness. She did not look at him, her eyes on the notepad in her hand. What can I get for you? An espresso, please, he said. At the sound of his voice, she looked up. Her eyes widened. Recognition dawned. And with it, a flicker of fear. He was the man from the other night. The man from the strange, silent phone call. You, she whispered. Me, he confirmed with a small smile. She hesitated, then seemed to find her professional footing. Of course. One espresso. Coming right up. She hurried away. Arthur watched her. Today, there was a difference. A subtle one. The constant, hunted vigilance in her posture was gone. she still looked tired, but the deep-seated fear that had been etched into her face was absent. She was free. She just did not know why yet. She returned with the espresso, placing it carefully on the table. Her hand trembled slightly. "Are you on business again?" she asked, her curiosity overriding her fear. "Yes," he said. "I came to pay a debt." She looked confused. "A debt? To whom?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out the napkin. It was creased and worn from his journey. He smoothed it out on the table and pushed it towards her. She stared at it. At her own handwriting. "I don't understand," she said, looking up at him, her brow furrowed. "You gave this to me," he explained. "You offered a stranger a kindness he did not deserve. It was valuable. More valuable than you can imagine." Her eyes searched his face. She was trying to piece together an impossible puzzle. "Last night," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "Marco. He didn't come. He didn't call. This morning. It was the first time in months I woke up and I wasn't afraid." She looked from the napkin to his eyes, a wild, impossible hope beginning to dawn. Was that you?" Arthur did not confirm or deny it. He simply took out his wallet. He removed a stack of €100 notes. It was more than enough to cover Marco's fictional debt 10 times over. He placed the money on the table, holding it down with the small espresso cup. "This is for your coffee," he said. "And for the sunshine." Tears welled in Ilara's eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming, unbelievable relief. They streamed down her face, washing away the last traces of fear. "Why?" she choked out. "Why would you do this for me? Who are you? Are you a good man?" Arthur considered the question. It was a question no one had asked him in a very long time. A question he had stopped asking himself. He met her gaze, his own eyes clear and steady. "I am what the situation requires," he answered, his voice soft. "Today, you reminded me what it feels like to be one." He stood to leave. Ilara reached out, her fingers brushing his arm. "Wait. I don't even know your name." "Arthur," he said. "Thank you, Arthur," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have given me back my life." He gave a small, formal nod. From his pocket, he produced a blank, Heavystock card. On it, written in his own hand, was a phone number. The same one he had used to call Julian. "This is my number," he said, placing it on the table next to the napkin. "If you ever need anything. Anything at all. The sunshine is worth protecting." He turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving her standing there amidst the money, the napkin, and the impossible gift of a new beginning. He did not look back. He had a plane to catch. His work in Lisbon was done. 1 year later. The cafe on the corner near the Lisbon docks had changed. It was no longer dim and crowded. It was bright, airy, and filled with the scent of fresh bread and cinnamon. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow. The tables were new. In the window, colorful pastries were displayed like jewels. A new, hand-painted sign hung above the door. It read, Sol. The Portuguese word for sun. Inside, Ilara moved with a newfound confidence. She was no longer just a waitress. She was the owner. She had bought the cafe from its previous owner, transforming it with the money Arthur had left and a loan she had secured with her own hard work. Her smile was no longer a ghost. It was real. It reached her eyes, which were no longer filled with exhaustion, but with purpose. She greeted her customers by name, her laughter echoing in the bright space. She had hired 2 young women from her old neighborhood, giving them the same chance she had been given. She was no longer a prisoner. She was a creator. A builder. She had taken the seed of hope Arthur had planted and cultivated it into a garden. On a small shelf behind the counter, next to jars of coffee beans, sat a small, framed photograph. It was of a stormy sea, a picture she had taken on her first day off in years. Tucked into the corner of the frame was a worn, crumpled napkin. Sometimes, when the cafe was quiet, she would look at it and remember the quiet, serious man with the sad eyes who had appeared like a phantom and changed her world. She never called the number he left. She did not need to. His gift was not the promise of future help, but the freedom to no longer need it. 4,000 miles away, in an office of glass and steel, Arthur Thorne sat at his obsidian desk. His world was still one of silence and control. His empire still ran on whispers and shadows. He was still a man who lived in the dark. But something was different. On the corner of his immaculate desk, where nothing personal had ever been allowed, sat a small, silver frame. It did not hold a picture of a building he had acquired or a rival he had conquered. It held a photograph, taken discreetly by one of Julian's men. It was a picture of a small, sun-drenched cafe in Lisbon called Sol. And tucked into the bottom of the frame, protected behind the glass, was a thin, cheap cocktail napkin. On it, you could just make out a looping script in faded blue ink. It was his memento. His proof. Proof that even in a life built on shadows, a single act of goodness could create a light that time and distance could not diminish. It was a reminder that true power was not the ability to destroy, but the choice to protect. For in the end, it is not our empires of steel or our fortresses of stone that define us. It is the small, fragile moments of connection we choose to honor. A kind word to a stranger, a helping hand to the fallen, a promise kept across an ocean. These are the things that weigh the most, the true treasures in a world too often concerned with the wrong kind of gold. And sometimes, all it takes is a single ray of sunshine to remind a man of the heart he thought he had lost forever.